PokerStatic.com. We bring you the interviews you want to hear. Now with your hosts, Bret Oliverio and Eric Bickel, the Poker Static Hot Seat.
What's up? You're checking out a brand new edition of the Poker Static Hot Seat. Bret Oliverio, Eric Bickel, and joining us tonight from his LA home, it's Haralabos Voulgaris. Haralabos, what's up?
Not much, guys. What's going on?
How are you, man? Pleasure having you on.
Thanks for having me.
You're mostly well known for your sports betting, Haralabos. I mean, you obviously have these tremendous poker results. We'll talk about all this. But what I find fascinating about you, just from doing research and the little that I know, you're a guy that's made a tremendous amount of money betting on sports over the last decade. Bret and I work in sports radio. I know a lot of people that bet on sports. I don't know one person that's a lifetime winner. I mean, I don't even know that I know one person that's won for a season. How do you do it? Give me the secret in a paragraph.
All right, the paragraph is just work harder than other people do at it. And part of working hard is figuring out what's good work and what's bad work. I kind of lucked into sports betting in some ways because I just kind of had a natural affinity for it, I think. And then when that natural affinity went away because the lines got a little bit tougher, I just put the work in and did like a lot more math research. And if I couldn't figure out how to solve a problem, I hired someone smarter than me who could figure it out. And I basically just repeated that process over and over and over again for the last 5 or 6 years once we started getting more of a math approach to it. And then we just built a better simulator to predict outcomes, basically. That's pretty much the gist of it.
Well, it's pretty sick. I mean, let's get. I know you've answered a lot of these questions before, but go back to the beginning a little bit. I believe your dad was a huge sports fan. You grew up in Canada, I believe. And
right.
You grew up around the track, so sort of your transition into sports betting almost was like a natural thing, right?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, my dad was a gambler. He had businesses. He was an entrepreneur. He was successful, but he had that gambling blood in him that, for whatever reason, he wanted to, devote most of his time at the racetrack or the horse racetrack or card rooms and then sports betting. So I just kind of grew up around it. I would, when the rest of my family was doing stuff, I was spending time with my dad at the racetrack, me and him, while my other family, the rest of my family was working at the restaurants or doing other parts of the business my dad had. So I was the youngest, so I kind of followed my dad around everywhere, and part of my experience growing up was kind of growing up at the horse racetrack, I believe Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday during racing season.
Now, did you grow up playing sports? Were you an athlete? Did you play high school basketball maybe?
I did. I played pretty much every sport but track. I haven't played badminton. I grew up in Winnipeg. My school wasn't that big, so our basketball team wasn't that good, but I played a lot of volleyball. Volleyball was probably my best sport. And then I played football and a couple other sports, although I think I only lasted like maybe a month and a half of football. I played football, and we had it was the first year the team ever had a football team, and I was a wide receiver, and I think in one game they had me run an end around, and by the time I got the ball, there was like 4 guys hitting me, and I had the wind knocked out of me, and that was pretty much, I said, all right, enough of this football thing. Being a wide receiver on a team that can't throw isn't all that exciting, so I'll stick to volleyball and the other sports.
Huh.
So,
I want to get back to the track, though, just for a second. Did you actually come up with a system to bet the ponies at all?
I was a degenerate loser at the racetrack. You can't beat, first of all, it's very difficult to beat the racetrack, especially a small racetrack like the Assiniboia Downs where the pools are very small. So I would study the racing form, and I would try to figure out all kinds of calculations based on speed rating for the horses. And I would do all right, but I wasn't winning any money, that's for sure.
Right.
But part of it was just the excitement of trying to, help my dad out so that he could lose his money as slowly as possible, because in general he wasn't winning very much money at the racetrack. And he actually did have a couple successful years horse racing. They had this thing called the Twin Triactor, which was you had to pick the first 3 winners of the first one of the races, and then for every time you got that right, if you bet a $2 ticket, then you get 1 chance to pick the first 3 winners, the first 3 horses in the next race in order. So this was a huge lottery thing. I think they would run it every night, and someone would win it maybe once every 6 weeks. My dad actually won it twice.
Wow.
In the same season. I think the second time he won it, I think he won 125,000 Canadian or something like that. So he was all right. He had his moments, but he was definitely not an overall lifetime winner.
Now, has it been your experience that guys that can be successful in sports betting, do they all have models at this point? Do they all have some sort of simulators that they're using? How many guys are out there and just betting their gut because they're sports fans and they feel like they know the rhythm and the vibe and the flow?
Yeah, there's something to be said for some subjectivity and being good at that. But by and large, the people who do that lose. There are some people who are exceptions to that rule, but I think a lot of people misunderstand what data is. And just watching a game and noticing something, that's data. Just something that you see is data. And so, like, for me, people ask me, what am I successful at? And it's tough for me to I started out being entirely subjectively based, not using any models, not using any real sophisticated math techniques. And then as it became more and more difficult to be successful that way, I started to incorporate both. To now where it's the point where I don't even know which, like, my subjective stuff is completely affected by what the math work that I do. So it's kind of like it all gets mixed up together, and the math work is affected by my subjective ideas that we tested and ended up being correct. So it's kind of a combination of both. The guys who sit there and watch games, who like watch SportsCenter and try to bet, by and large, are not very successful. It's the people who, for whatever reason, luck into some strategy that works and then are able to kind of improve along the way.
What's your take on sports handicappers? Because, I mean, a lot of these guys, if they could pick winners, they would be putting, most of their own money on their picks.
Yeah, I'm not a big,
that makes sense. And you're actually doing it. You're putting your own money on your picks. Are most of those guys just frauds?
Yeah, most of them are frauds. I mean, the famous Two for the Money movie that came out was like a complete and utter joke. But most of them are frauds. I mean, what you said is true, is if they could really be successful betting, they would bet and not have to sell their picks. And a lot of them, what they do is they'll release, to half the country they'll release one team, to the other half the country they'll release the other team, and they guarantee themselves, half of their customers are happy because half of them won. They'll do tricks like that. There are some honest guys who've had some success. I'm sure you guys have heard of someone by the name of Dr. Bob. For a while there, he was pretty successful. But the problem with that is that anytime you start giving out your information to people for a small fee, you're diluting your actual edge by a large amount. And I think that's what happened to Dr. Bob. Dr. Bob really isn't as nearly as good as he was 5 or 6 years ago, and that's because he basically told everybody how to successfully handicap college football and what types of techniques to use, and he diluted his edge. So he was probably just better off just betting the games on his own. Some people don't have the ability to gamble money, and so it's easier for them to handicap or sell subscriptions, but those guys to me are for the most part, frauds with very few exceptions.
Now, do you have like a proprietary thing with your sort of model? Is it completely unique to you and your experience? Or are there other guys that run sort of similar simulators and models? Or do you have any idea what other people are doing?
Yeah, I don't know what other people are doing. I would say there's almost no chance anyone's doing anything similar to what we're doing. They might be doing something similar, but not in the same way. And then the one thing I learned when I started interviewing with teams in the last year was that, by and large, what I have or what we have is way more sophisticated than anything else out there. It's because it's just, I spent more money on it, to be blunt. We spent a lot of money and time on research, and these teams don't really spend any time on it, and the ones that do don't really have an idea, and they have this real negative vibe on gambling. But the number one resource for who is an effective, the number one resource for sports is the actual wagering line. The opening line and the closing line gives you more information about sports than any other type of statistic you could look at, because those are the smartest people in the world who are betting and generally winning on sports, and they are giving you their opinion on which team is better. And that's much more valuable than any type of data you could run in some ways. So these teams who build these models to evaluate players, if they're not testing these models against actual gambling lines, what are they testing them against? How do they know they're effective? And none of them are doing that for the most part. And when I mentioned that to a couple of them, they kind of had like this aha moment, like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. It was kind of like I said, if you're going to buy a company, why would you ever buy a publicly traded company and say, I don't want to know what the share price is. Don't tell me how much Apple's trading at and what their market cap is. I just want to buy the company. And that's kind of what these teams are doing in some ways. They're evaluating players, but not really seeing what the players are worth by comparing the Vegas lines, opening and closing lines.
Now, you stopped gambling for like a year or so, and maybe it was longer than that, but it was my impression, Haralabos, that sort of the idea was, you know what, I'm going to kind of distance myself from that for a little bit. I want to be serious about maybe getting a job here with an NBA franchise. Ultimately with the idea of maybe being a general manager one day, that would be unbelievable. But
Right.
from talking to you before we went on the air, you said, you know what, I think I'm going to get back into it. Even though you had some opportunities, you're going to get back into gambling.
Right. Yeah, I actually did do some work for, I don't want to say a team because it wasn't for the actual basketball team. It was for someone who was affiliated with the team, and it was like a separate consulting agreement with an NDA. So I wouldn't be able to mention it anyways. But I actually did some work. And, I mean, okay, if I could jump right into becoming a general manager, which is obviously a fantasy that would never happen, would I do it? Maybe. But the idea of like putting in 5 or 6 years of time with the maybe 30% chance that it will lead to something, and I'm just giving up way too much equity doing what I'm doing. And to be honest, I didn't really, when I was doing it, I didn't really enjoy it as much as I thought I would. I mean, my involvement was just, emailing correspondence and running reports and giving my opinion on certain things. But yeah, it just wasn't nearly as exciting as I thought it would be. And on top of that, I felt like there really is a lot of freedom in doing what I do for a living, and I enjoyed it. And I missed it. I missed gambling, to be honest. I did. I mean, I missed sitting there knowing I was right about something because I won money. I mean, you can have all these ideas that you're right. I know this player is better than that player, and when they make this trade, it's going to fail. But then there's also something to be said for, I know this team is going to be better than this other team because they've added this player, and then risking your money on it and being right or wrong. I think I missed that bit of like constant affirmation.
Now one of the teams. Go ahead, Bret.
Are you able to say like which teams you interviewed with and how many NBA teams were interested?
I mean, there was a lot of people that were interested for sure. I would say you could divide those people into a bunch of different categories. One of which the people who were interested in mining me as a resource, but had never any intention of having me work for them in any way. There was a bunch of those guys. There were some people who actually had some legitimate interest and actually offered me a position, which I turned down at the very beginning because I thought the money was insulting, but it actually turned out to be almost 2 times more than any other team offered me after that. In terms of teams, I don't know. I mean, if I was still not gambling, I was like, okay, I'm not going to, there's zero possibility of me getting back to gambling. I'd have no problem telling you which teams I interviewed with. But I think maybe just out of respect to them, I think it's probably better not to. I tell you, I did meet with a team who, actually, it's funny because unless you're actually meeting with the owners, which I did meet a couple of them, you have like no shot of ever having anything positive happen because you're basically interviewing with people whose job you think you can do better than and whose job you aspire to take.
Right.
And those were some really awkward interactions.
For sure.
I thought.
Yeah, I bet. One of your key sort of theories, it seems like, and I don't mean that in an insulting way. I'm sure it's been proven, but it seems to me that your premise is a lot of your thoughts on basketball are around the corner three, and you feel like teams that emphasize, utilize, defend the corner three the best are going to have the best chance of success in a vacuum. Can you explain your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's like, basketball analytics like circa 2005. I mean, that's like kind of what people figured out in 2005. The Spurs figured it out ahead of the curve, ahead of other teams did. It's just basically it's the most efficient shot from the floor because you're getting 3 points for it versus 2. And it's a short distance. It's very easy to make in some ways compared to like a long 2. There's certain 2-pointers that are actually longer distance than the 3-point shot, and you're only getting 2 points for those. So that's a pretty basic part of it. I think pretty much, I would say without exception, nearly every team realizes that now, although there have been some pretty glaring examples of teams who just don't attempt these 3-pointers still for whatever reason. But for the most part, I think most teams will realize that that's pretty basic analysis now. And the idea just behind it is if you look at the EV of every single action on the court, that has a higher EV than like a long 2, and it has just a marginally lower EV than like a shot in the paint. And obviously your goal would be to take just 3-point shots and shots in the paint, but from a game theory standpoint, that's impossible to do because it's very easy to defend that specific. So you do have to have some trade-offs in some ways.
Right.
But just in general, teams that don't understand this are kind of comical. There's actually a funny situation where Phil Jackson, I met with someone who was affiliated with the Lakers, and they told me Phil Jackson's belief on the corner 3-point shot. And he actually, 2 years ago, welcomed the corner 3-point shot because he thought that teams who took these corner 3-point shots, the rebounds, and he actually didn't want his team taking these shots. He actually thought the rebounds were easier for the defensive team to get the rebound and start a fast break. So when I heard this, one of the first things I did was I thought, I must be wrong. This is like the greatest coach ever. And what I did was I actually charted every single three-point shot that was taken that year, watched them. We have a video system that allows us to watch all the plays and view them. And I watched every three-point shot that was taken in the last 2 years and charted which ones led to rebounds that led to fast breaks and which ones didn't, or which ones looked like they might lead to fast breaks and which ones didn't. And not only was the corner three-point shot not more likely to lead to fast breaks, but they were actually less likely than the other three-point shots. So it's funny. So here's a guy who has these ideas. And, I mean, part of it might have been like misinformation, but I really don't believe it was misinformation. I really do believe he believed that it was okay to let the other team take three-point shots from the corner because they were going to miss them and we were going to get layups the other way.
Right. Oh, that is
hilarious. Did you tell him your findings? Did you go back to him and say, hey, look, here's the deal?
Yeah, I never spoke to Phil Jackson, but I spoke to someone who worked with the Lakers, and I said, this guy's out of his fucking mind if he really does believe this. And it was actually funny because if you watch the finals the year they lost to Boston, I mean, one of the common themes in that series was the Lakers defended the corner three-point shot horribly in that series.
Wow.
And it was just kind of funny to me that he had this long-held belief and never actually, bothered to hire some flunky to actually see if it was accurate or not.
Well,
he's got like 10 champions.
Right. It's so
he's obviously doing everything else right.
It's so funny that you find that out, and I'm not a basketball statistical nerd by any stretch. I don't understand all of these things, but just from being a guy that plays basketball and growing up around the sport, I always figured that the corner three would be a more difficult shot because you don't have the backboard behind it to help with some of the short and long shots. I guess that's a total fallacy.
Yeah, I mean, very rarely, I think you can count the number of times a player misses a shot really long and it banks in. In general, maybe in the rec league, they're like shooting. Yeah, but in the NBA, they're missing by such small margins that the backboard coming into play is pretty rare.
Doesn't it hit the front of the rim or the back of the rim and then slightly graze the backboard to come in, like when you shoot from the top of the key, or no?
Maybe. I don't know. I just know the number one. I mean, it's like worth like, many percentage points more shooting from the corner than it is shooting from.
No,
I've never really tested it myself, but it seems to me like that what you're saying may or may not be true, but I don't really recall too many three-point shots banking in or hitting in or whatever.
Well, certainly, yeah. I'm not saying banking in. I'm just saying sometimes it appears to me you hit the front of the rim, and then it hits the backboard, and then it goes in. But that's just a fallacy.
It's a longer distance. Yeah, it's just a longer. I think that the key thing is it's a longer distance.
Yeah.
And that extra bit of distance from the corner versus the elbow or straight away just makes up for a big portion of it.
Right.
Let me ask you about your sort of early background. You're obviously an intelligent guy. Are you one of these guys who killed it on the SATs, killed it in math? And, did you go to school? Where did you go to school? How'd you do an educational background?
I didn't take an SAT because I was in Canada, but we did I had my background was actually really poor. I had a math teacher. I mention this at every opportunity because I'm so angry that I had this guy for 2 years. But I had a math teacher named Mr. Shepard. And he was my math and science teacher for both grade 7, 8, and 9, or all years, grade 7, 8, and 9. And he was a guy who just didn't believe in teaching. And so he would bring in, I think we watched Cool Hand Luke 55 times in 3 years. He would actually have us watch movies in math class. We never took any tests.
Nice.
So when I got to grade 10, and they started I signed up for the normal math class, and they gave me these tests. I was like, what is this? I've never heard of any of this stuff. A quadratic equation. What is all this stuff? I've never heard of it. And they were like, well, where did you go to school? And I was like, I went to school at Charleswood Junior High. And the guy ended up getting fired a few years later. But so my math background was pretty weak. And I just took the very simple math courses in high school, and I did more of a liberal arts. I took drama and philosophy and creative writing when I was in university. So I never really I always had an affinity for numbers, but it was the very basic number stuff that you could work out in your head. I never actually studied any of the algebra or anything like that because we had a terrible teacher. So when I got to the point where I wanted to needed to actually use advanced mathematics, I kind of had to teach myself a little bit about regression analysis. And I'm by no means an expert even to this day, but I'm at least smart enough to figure out who is and evaluate the people who would work for me and do that type of work. And they're the ones doing the heavy lifting in some ways, and I'm just evaluating which one of the two of them are doing a better job and keeping the one who does good and getting rid of the one who does bad, and that's kind of what I've done. So,
Was it always a sort of a natural transition for you to turn your love of sports and betting and then also incorporate the numbers? Did that just make all the sense in the world to you, or how did you do that? Because so many people just sort of bet and they use their gut and they go with that. What made you think that I can use my math background or my instinct for math to make this work
Right.
for me?
I think it's just a matter of, like, I was in the situation where I wanted to watch as many basketball games as possible. And when you're watching that many games, you're not paying attention as much as you could, obviously. And then there's just certain things that I'm watching, but that the math can watch for me. So I can watch every game, every play over the course of a number of years by using the math and by recording the data in such a way and analyzing it that it was basically just, okay, I can't watch all these games. Let me at least look at the data from these games and figure out what's going on, and then using that to inform my subjective opinion. Like, one of the first things I started looking at was how quickly teams were getting into their offense in various situations, and just having that data versus like watching and saying, oh, look how fast this team is playing now, they're trailing, or oh, look how slow they're playing, they're winning. Having the data just made it a lot easier to do that for like every possession back to the time that they started recording that type of data. So.
Wow. And did you find that the more successful teams, clearly there was a statistical trend that they knew there was some conscious thing that they were doing, or was it more of just they sort of luck boxed their way into it with talent?
I think that a lot of it is just luck. I think a lot of it is like drafting, having the number one pick. Like, the Spurs are a great team and they're super smart and everybody knows all this, but hey, they got Tim Duncan. And had they not have gotten Tim Duncan, where would they be? Who knows? So it's kind of tough to say in some ways. But the beginning of my career, I hardly ever bet during the regular season on which team would win the games. I was just betting on how many points they'd score. That was kind of like my specialty, the over-unders. So, to be honest, for like the first 4 or 5 years I was watching basketball, I didn't care which team was winning. I was just looking at the total points scored. So sometimes people would say, wow, did you watch the game? What a comeback. And I was like, oh, there was a comeback? I didn't realize. I just know they scored 192 points, and I needed like 189. That's all I would really pay attention to. So for the longest time, I wasn't paying attention to any of this stuff. I was just paying attention to how quickly the ball was going in the basket and how often. Really was all I was paying attention to. So.
Why did you never seem to focus on the NFL?
I just think I like basketball better. I think from a math perspective, like one of the purest things you can bet on is, I think I've mentioned this a few times before, is just, I mean, in a basketball game, let's say the average points scored is 200 points. That means any one fluke play at most is going to cost you 3 points on the total. 1.5 points a percent of your bet is on that play. Whereas in football, there's just a lot of, you could bet an over-under 42 and the team fumbles the ball at the 6-yard line. You just lost like an expected 4 points or something like that. And that's a huge percent. That's 10% of your play. So there's a lot of more variance involved in some ways in football. And then on top of that, in the NFL, there's only, each team plays how many games? 18 games? I don't even know. I don't pay attention, but they play very few games.
Right.
Yeah, 16 games. So let's say you do have a big edge. How much are you going to be able to apply that edge over a 16-game season? The variance is a lot higher.
Right, sure. Plus with parity.
NFL football is the pot limit Omaha. It's the pot limit Omaha of sports betting.
Exactly.
There's a lot of luck involved.
What about baseball? Baseball just so naturally lends itself to statistics and statistical analysis, and it has been historically. Why not use your mind for that?
Yeah, the problem with baseball is that you have too many sabermetricians, and really, I mean, there was people who were doing the baseball stuff for a number of years, like from 1998 or 1990. So Chip and Doyle actually had the most successful baseball program for sports betting of probably all time. Back in like 98 or 97, they were using this guy's program. And so what happened was they were successful, hugely successful for a number of years. But then, with the advent of the internet and the advent of people publishing, people started just projecting what would happen in a baseball game and publishing their simulators. And now if you look on the internet, you can pretty much figure out which team is going to be good based on the statistics. And there's really no secret formula to baseball anymore, like there was years ago. So that's why I never got involved in it, because pretty much anything that was worth knowing had already been explained by Bill James for the most part.
Right.
Whereas basketball's not really like that yet, although it's close. It's very quickly getting to be that way.
What's your system of betting? Like during a typical NBA season, are you betting every single night? How many bets are you placing? And are you varying the amounts? Or can you talk about that?
Yeah, so my subjective stuff that I did that was not related to the simulator at all, which is my own opinion, I would probably be betting, let's say, 30% of the games. Of those 30% of the games, I was probably betting at least the first half or a second half total or a full game total in each one of those games. Sometimes I would bet all three. Sometimes I bet in the same game the over in the first half and the under in the second half, or over, under, etc. So my average bet, I think, at my peak when I was like a big timer — I'm not a big timer anymore because I just took too much time off and I spent too much money. But when I was a big timer, I was betting like 80,000. That was like my biggest. That'd be like my normal bet. That was like probably in 2004 when I was like literally stealing. I mean, it was like a joke how easy it was back then.
All right, hold on. Slow down. Did you say 80,000 a game?
I was in 2004 and 2003. I was betting whatever the fuck I could. I mean, I didn't care what my bankroll was. I mean, I looked at the line and I said, okay, the line in this total is like, let's say 95.5 on a first half total.
Okay.
And I wanted to bet over. And I would bet as much money as we could bet up to 96.5. And as long as the line was under 96.5, I would keep on betting until I ran out of money or they moved the line. And there'd be some games where we would have like 110,000, and there'd be some games where they'd move the line very quickly, and I wouldn't get as much. But my goal was basically just to bet as much money as possible on these games where I felt like the line was like off by like 20% or something.
Okay, so I need to understand this. How did they correct themselves? Why did you feel like you were stealing? I don't get all that.
Because they just didn't have a clue. They just didn't, I mean, I don't want to get into it too much, but they didn't have a clue. Certain teams had very specific tendencies and in situations. And, you know, there was a game where, let's say if the game total on a basketball game was 190.
Right.
Okay? The way they used to make the first half line was the first half line would be 95.5. And the second half line would be 94.5, and that's how they'd make their number. It was that simple. They'd make the first half a little bit higher and the second half a little bit lower. When with some teams, the actual right number was probably 80 in the first half and 110 in the second half. And that was probably the real number. And so, I mean, that was just like I would win. I mean, it would be very rare for me to lose. It was just a joke. I mean, I went that year in 2003. I had like 5 or 6 stretches where I won over 16 games in a row, separate stretches altogether. It was just like you'd have to get so unlucky to lose. I mean, you'd go under 95 and they'd score like 74 points, and it was just like really unlucky for you to lose.
Oh my God!
Let me ask you this: now in poker, like results are out there. Poker players don't mind talking about how much money they're winning and losing. Are you able to say, you know, what's your best, how much you made in your best year, or is that personal information?
I mean, So I would do that. I would bet a lot of money on these sports, right, that I had a big edge on. And then maybe I would bet like more, money on other sports that I didn't have as big edge on. So I don't know that I think people think I won a lot more money than I actually did. I don't even know what a lot of money is. It's all relative. But I had some good years, and, I don't really like to talk too much about numbers, but I was betting a lot. I think in 2004 or 2005, the game kind of caught up to me a little bit. And I overreacted, and I made some bad bets because all my bread and butter plays were gone. And they were probably not gone. They were probably, instead of being like a 58% edge, it was probably still at 54%. And I completely ignored the 54% because I was so bitter that my type of style was getting out, that I started looking for all these other edges that didn't exist. And I actually lost money, like a small amount in 2005, and took a break for a year to try and figure out, okay, now I can't bet this team over every fucking game in the second half or this team under every game in the first half anymore. What am I supposed to do? So I don't know. I don't really talk. That's a kind of a long way of answering no. I don't want to tell you exactly how much money I made. But that's, the idea of that I was making all this money, and then it was kind of like I was living like a pretty lavish lifestyle too, and I've mellowed out a little bit since then. So.
Well, let me ask you this. Like, for a guy like me, when I hear, okay, you're going to be placing 80,000, on each game, like, how do you do that? I mean, are you doing it online, through a person, to the casinos? I mean, can you even talk about that?
Yeah, back then, so I had people working for me who would place bets. That was their job, was to place bets. I had other people who wanted to be partners with me, and they would open up accounts and give me a certain amount of the action. We had markets that were untapped in like different parts of the world that people didn't know about. It was a pretty sophisticated operation. Problem is that a lot of people, when that happens, is that too many people start knowing what you're betting. When you're employing all these people to bet for you, and then they have like your whole play card. It'd be like, in poker, it'd be like giving everyone your hand history when you're like the only person who knows how to play heads up, no limit, and then giving everyone full access to your hand history, including your cards, and having them figure out, oh, this is what he's doing. This is pretty obvious. So a lot of the people that I used to work with really ruined the market for me because, we were dealing with this one guy who was really greedy. If he was betting me 30,000, he was probably betting 100,000 for himself on these games, and it completely ruined the market. So now I'm a lot more, it's kind of like, would you like to, you can shear a sheep many times, but you can only skin them once or whatever. Now I'm more smart about, trying to apply my edge a little more conservatively over a longer period of time versus like just trying to crush everybody as quickly as possible.
Would any of the books, would they ban you the way they would like a card counter? Would they say we just won't take Haralabos' bets?
It was funny because like when I first kind of came out as a sports gambler and like in the media with like this ESPN stuff, there was all these professional gamblers who were in the know. Were like, this guy's a fraud. I've never even heard of this guy before. So I never bet in my own name ever. I'd always hire people or I'd have people to work for me. So there's like some funny exchanges on like the 2+2 of the sports gambling world where people were talking about what a fraud I was because no one had ever heard of me. And one guy took it upon himself to like ask some sports books to prove everyone how big a fraud I was. And he was like the biggest proponent of how big a fraud I was, right? How it was bullshit. And he came back after like talking to 5 sports books, like, have you ever heard of this guy? And they're all like, yeah, he's the real deal, trust me. And then he was like my biggest fan after that. But so for a while there, no one knew who was betting these games. They just knew some kid in Canada or some computer guy was what they would always say. No one really knew. A few people knew, but I tried to keep like a bunch of different people betting for me, and it was more, a lot of people thought that my main mover was the sharpest guy ever because he was the guy who was betting all the games for me. And they just thought it was him or his crew. And they were really successful at other sports, so they just assumed that their basketball must be theirs too. So it was kind of a different situation back then.
Give me an idea of...
Now I'm a little bit more...
Go ahead.
A little bit more above the radar now versus back then. I tried to be a little bit lower.
Right.
Lower key.
Give us a little idea of what it was like in your heyday. I don't know, 2003, 2004. You're living a life. You're, 80,000 a game. I mean, are hookers blow?
What it was like.
What? Tell us everything.
No hookers. I've never been a fan of drugs. I've never done like any hard drug in my life. I think I did pot brownies one time at Antonio Esfandiari's house, and I was like, this is the most unbelievable. I sat there for like 8 hours on the sofa because I didn't know how much we were supposed to eat. It was a nightmare, and I haven't touched anything since. So there was no hookers or no blow. I was working hard. I was just in Canada. I was working hard. But my average thing was, like, in 2004, I remember I would roll out of bed and I'd say, oh, are the Washington Wizards playing today? Oh, they are. Okay. Let's bet the under in the first half and the over in the second half in the Washington Wizards games when they're on the road. And that's what I did for, like, ever. And Eddie Jordan had this offense where their team was so bad, I think their point guards were Steve Blake and Juan Dixon.
Right.
And their team was so bad that they just wanted to keep the games as close as possible in the first half that you could just literally just bet the under every game in the first half on the road. And they would probably score like 74 points or something like that. And then in the second half, they would open up the playbook a little bit and play a little bit faster. And God forbid they ever got close, because then they would never stop fouling until the game was like over.
Right.
And it was just like stealing. So I would just kind of roll out of bed and I would, hey, the Wizards are playing today. Awesome. Let's. They're on the road. Oh, perfect. Let's bet that. And there was other teams with similar types of tendencies.
I'm guessing Mike Fratello. You made a killing off of him, right?
Yeah, there's always this misinformation that gets out anytime a new coach becomes a head coach. And there's, the first thing a head coach always says is, I'm going to run. Like Mike Fratello even said this. He said, oh, I used to coach Dominique Wilkins and we had these high-scoring games. But meanwhile, aside from the years he was coaching Dominique Wilkins, he was like the slowest coach of all time.
Right.
So you would bet I think the year he took over Memphis, I think they went under like 9 out of 11 games or something like that. And then I think the same year D'Antoni became the head coach of Phoenix and they went over for a bunch of games. So it's really, you have to my math guy would say you need more of a sample, but the subjective guy can say, no, I'm watching these games. These teams are doing something completely different. This is not random.
Right.
There's an edge there. Let's exploit it. But
I want to get, real quick, a couple more basketball questions out of the way, then we'll jump into the poker. We're based in D.C.
Okay.
I want to get your feel for the Wizards because it's been 30 years of losing, basically, and now there's some renewed optimism. There's a new owner. We still have Ernie, but there's a new owner, and we got John Wall. And I think there's some young talent there with Blatch and JaVale McGee. And I don't know, I think we score some easy baskets.
Oh, he's not a big JaVale McGee fan.
I'm not a big JaVale McGee or an Andre Blatch fan, to be honest. I think they're pretty fucking brutal basketball players. But
right.
But they have that talent, that famous talent that they're tall, so everyone automatically thinks sooner or later JaVale McGee's going to get smarter. I mean, somehow the light's going to go off and maybe he'll be smarter, and maybe it'll happen because he's certainly a unique talent.
Can he get 14? Can he get 14 a game just running the court on oops with Wall?
Maybe if they played like the Minnesota Timberwolves every game or something. I mean, teams really do adjust. If that's all you do, teams will adjust to that. Like, don't ever underestimate advanced scouting in the NBA. Teams will figure out. I mean, you may be able to get away with it for the first couple of weeks or something, but teams will be able to figure out, okay, let's get back on defense and then let them operate in the half court. And that's where that team will really struggle a lot because they don't really have any shooters anymore.
Heinrich.
I mean, yeah, he's not, I wouldn't classify him as a shooter, but he's not a bad shooter, but he's not like a guy that you really feel like, oh boy, we can't leave Kurt Heinrich all alone, he's going to kill us from the outside. Whereas they did have that a little bit with Mike Miller in some ways, or and their big guys kind of shoot like Andre Bloch loves to shoot the most inefficient shot in basketball, like it's his job to take the fucking 18-footer every time. And then they got and then they got E, right? I mean, isn't that like that's his game, the 19-foot 2-point shot just inside the 3-point line. So it's tough. It's
you know what else?
tough.
You know what else was disturbing about Yi is I was reading your blog, and what's the site where people can read your blog?
Oh yeah, it's I don't ever update it, but it's aloneinthecorner.com.
Okay, and I believe I was reading that, or it might have been an ESPN article where he was like in your honorable mention worst defenders in the league, and I read that today, and I'm like, oh my god.
Yeah, that was in my Alone in the Corner worst defensive players in the league, and the trouble with him is that he doesn't really have a defined position. He can't really guard a 3 because he's too big and he's not agile enough to guard like the really athletic 3s, and he can't really guard the really big 4s either. So he's kind of stuck in between, where he's like perfect at guarding other players just like him, but he has a lot of trouble with the super athletic or the super strong players. So it makes it tough. The thing that's odd about him is that, I mean, how old do they say he is? He's like probably 3 years older than he actually is, right? Isn't that like the theory behind that?
Probably.
What? It's possible.
Yeah.
I wanted to get you. Go ahead, Bret.
Let me ask you this. Back to sort of gambling. You took a year and a half off. You're going to get back into it next week. What makes you so?
I don't know. I haven't decided yet.
Okay. Well, what makes you so sure? Like, if you get back into it, you can beat it. You know, what if you get back into it and you lose more than you did in the past, and then you're doing all this math, you're employing all these people, you have this sophisticated system, but you're losing. Then what? Is that possible?
Because the system, yeah, of course, it's always possible. I mean, every year I would go through these panic attacks, like, how am I going to win? I don't even remember what I did. How did I, especially with my subjective stuff, I'd sit there for the first week of the season and not have a clue what I was going to do, and then it just comes to me. But, we're able to test our simulation stuff, and our simulation stuff is tested as well as it has when I was betting or when it wasn't betting. It hasn't really changed too much in any way, so I'm optimistic that if I decide to get back into it, I can probably beat it. I mean, maybe not as much as I could. To be honest, I never had a problem beating the lines. I always had a problem getting stiffed by people. That was like the number one thing that made me actually get out of gambling more than anything, was just dealing with all these fucking deadbeats who don't want to pay, or want to be big shots and pretend they're big shots and want to do business with you, and then it turns out they're fucking deadbeats and they don't want to pay you, and they owe you like $1 million, they owe you $2 million, and I've got stories that I would love to tell about other poker players who are quote-unquote big shots and in fact are like the biggest deadbeats in the world. But
why don't you tell them?
I don't, because I'm still owed money in some cases, and I think it's bad business in other cases, and I think in other cases I think the person means well in some cases, but he just can't help himself, so I just like to keep that stuff to myself. But that was like part of what made me really say I've had enough of this. It wasn't really I want to be a general manager. It was kind of like, okay, here's another guy who wants to run off with like $1.5 million or whatever, or however what the situation is. And it just seemed like that was happening more than I really wanted to stomach. And I was a pretty trusting guy for a long period of time. And I kind of went a really long period of time without having any laydowns. So it all just kind of happened within like a year and a half span. And I kind of said, okay, I need to find something else for my own sanity, because this type of work isn't really doing anything for me from a mental health perspective. So
was that a lot of was that a lot of the poker community that was stiffing you?
Not a lot of the poker community, but there's definitely a few guys that are involved in poker and in sports betting. Maybe they're more famous sports bettors and they play poker on the side, or maybe they're more famous poker players and they play sports on the side. But there's just been a lot of people that I've, for whatever reason, have had the misfortune of doing business with, who just went busto and, put you on the payment plan, and now you're just sitting there like begging them to give you like a little bit of money here and there because they owe you and you haven't collected in a while. And so there was a lot of that. There was the guys who worked for me who just, for whatever reason, something happened in their personal life and they decided they were going to fuck off with some money. And it was just like a lot of that. A lot of that stuff happens in the gambling world. Or books that you're betting into that go broke because you beat them for too much over many years, and they decide they're not going to pay you the last little bit, and they're just going to go broke, and that happens a lot too.
Wow.
Yeah, so I mean, the absolute poker scandal that happens with poker has happened 10 times in the sports betting world, not where the site cheated the players, but where the site just closed shop and never paid. That's happened a lot in sports.
Well, let me ask you this. If you take all the money you were cheated and didn't get back from Ultimate Bet and all the money you've been stiffed sports betting, either from people or casino or books, whatever, what would the total be? Would it be millions, tens of millions?
Would it be more? Would it be how much, I'm sorry?
Would it be millions, tens of millions? I mean, I don't know.
No, it would not be tens of millions. Not even close to that. But it would be more than it would probably be more than, probably between 3 to 5 million, I'd say it. 3 million for sure.
Jesus.
Wow.
And then I don't know, the UV thing's a big mystery because I still don't know how much I would cheat up because they won't send me my hand history. So I don't know how much I would cheat out of there. But I'm guessing that number's probably capped at like $1 million or something like that. I don't think it's much more than that. But for sports, I've had like a lot of laydowns and bad, partners who decide they're going to fuck off with half the money and all this other stuff that have happened in the course of my, 10 plus year career betting sports really successfully.
Well, let's jump into poker then. How did you make that transition into poker? Where did that evolve from your whole sports betting odyssey? Did you grow up playing poker? When did you start playing professionally? How did all that come about?
Yeah, I just started watching the WPT. I think I watched the WPT Costa Rican, whatever the fuck it was called. I watched that tournament, and I knew because I had been in Costa Rica meeting some sports books that year about getting some accounts and doing some stuff, and I recognized one of the guys. I think his name was Luis Velabolos or something, and that was one of the guys. He was running an investment fund where you could give him money and he would pay you 15% interest. He was like a small-time Bernie Madoff in Costa Rica, basically.
Right.
So I saw this. I was like, what are these guys playing? I mean, I knew what poker was, but I never really had played it very much before. And I just thought, this seems exciting. I mean, we could travel to these different places and maybe make some sports contacts and maybe get some accounts and play poker. And then I just caught the poker bug. And one of my first friends who played, who was a poker player, was Josh Arya, and I remember him and Eric Lindgren, when I first started playing online poker, was on a site called World Sports Exchange. They had a sports book, and they had a poker room. And I'm pretty sure I financed, Eric Lindgren's entire, early poker career because I was just lost playing hold'em against him all the time. I had no clue what I was doing, at all. And I had all this money in my sports account that I couldn't get out because they were really slow at payouts. So I would just, dust off $10,000 at poker, $15,000, $12,000. Playing heads up to this guy who I thought was the luckiest player ever, who in fact was 10 times better than, probably 100 times. I mean, it didn't matter. I could not win. I could not beat him. Right. The way I was playing. So then I said, I really want to figure out this game. And that was probably in 2003, I think, maybe. I don't know, 2004, 2003. I think maybe the World Sports Exchange thing came before the World Poker Tour. I'm not sure. I think it did. And then when I saw the World Poker Tour again, that's when I decided to play tournaments. And my first time ever really playing live poker was in a Bellagio $5,000 tournament or a $10,000 tournament or something like that. And I had no clue what I was doing again. But I picked it up pretty quick. I think by the time 2004 came around, I felt like I was probably a winning player.
So this is before the training sites and things of that nature?
Yeah.
So did you pick up?
My training site was UB.
Right.
That was my training site. It was, could I beat Doyle Brunson played. He was Diet Root Beer, and Chip Reese played. I can't remember which one of the 15 usernames he was using then. And it was just a game that was a 25-50 no-limit hold'em game, and that's how I learned how to play poker. And I hired one of my programmers to scrape all the hands that were played when I was playing and when I wasn't playing. So I had access to all the hands, the observed hands and all that other stuff. And that's when I really learned how to play. I studied Prahlad's game a lot because he was the guy who seemed to be winning a lot. And I just really devoted myself to playing poker a lot. I think from 2004, from August of 2004 or July of 2004 till February of 2005, I played more poker probably then than I played since or before. And I just really tried to beat. And I started to beat the 25-50 game, which is remarkable because I was actually getting cheated, and I didn't know this, but I was getting cheated, and I was still able to win, make money at the game. And then I just started playing more tournaments, and then I had a little bit of success playing in the WPT that year. And that was pretty much it. I was kind of hooked for poker for a little while. I really liked playing poker after that.
Well, how could you not get hooked? I mean, I've looked at your tournament results. They're pretty absurd for a guy that plays a little part-time WPT event every once in a while. What do you attribute that to? Do you just have some sort of sick tournament knack, or is that variance, or what is it?
Probably a combination of both. I mean, I feel like I feel like if you were to ask a lot of poker players back when I was playing the bigger live no-limit games, 200, 400, 100, 200, in like the summer of 2008 or the summer of 2007, whatever it was, if you were to ask who the top no-limit cash game players in the world, I think some people would have said that I was in that group. A lot of people probably would have said that I was pretty close to that when I played a lot. I just felt like I just learned a lot. But then people, then I took some time off. And even before I took some time off, there was all these kids who just got to be at that level or better very, very quickly. And I quickly realized if I was going to play poker at these high stakes, I was either going to have to put in as much time as these kids were putting in, or they were going to be better than me very quickly. And I just decided that it was okay that they were going to be very better than me because I don't want to put the time into poker and I don't enjoy it as much as they do. And I kind of let poker take a backseat to like some other things. I quickly said, actually, I made like a promise myself I was not going to play online live cash game anymore. I think that was in like 2006 maybe. It was like right after I got cheated in a pretty big session on UB. And I just knew, I felt like I knew for sure I got cheated. I looked at all my hands. I saw that I never once saw the person's hand on the river unless he had me beat. Like I never once called and had to, ever. I mean, it was the most, I think one time I called with like king high on the river and I won. That was the only time I ever saw his hand and didn't win the hand. And it took me calling with like king high on the river to actually fucking win the pot. And I was just a miserable person to be around. I think I was when the first little bit of time I spent with my girlfriend at the time, she had moved in, and I just said, well, if I'm going to live with someone else, I'm definitely not going to play online poker because this is not enjoyable for me to lose this money or get frustrated and get aggravated. And then I just never played anymore after that. I played tournaments, but cash games I just kind of gave it up. And I think if you're going to be a good cash game player, you have to play a lot of hands. And I just wasn't really willing to sacrifice my home sanity life for being a good cash game grinder.
What's your opinion of the high-stakes games these days that are playing, like on Full Tilt, for example? I mean, these, we've gotten to meet a lot of them. They're great guys, but it seems like a lot of them made their money a couple years ago, when Guy was just giving money to everybody. And now, I mean, I don't know anything about it. It just seems like they're sort of just trading money amongst themselves. Do any of these guys have huge edge? And none of them seem to be particularly bankrolled for it.
Yeah, I don't think any of them are bankrolled for it, for sure. Maybe it went like Phil and a couple other examples are bankrolled for it. And in some ways, I think they are just passing money back and forth. I think there's definitely players who aren't good enough to play those games. I think that's clear who those players may or may not be. So there is some edge, but you just run your risk of ruin is very, very high because your edge is so small compared to the way it used to be. But I give those guys a lot of credit. I mean, I give guys like this Jungle Man and Durr and all these other guys who are willing to maybe when I was younger, when I was betting 80,000 a game, I had that gambling in me, but I just don't have that gambling anymore where I'm going to sit down and play these huge stakes on the internet. Or even live for that matter. I just don't have that in me anymore.
Right.
Let me ask you about your house because, I was actually blown away. You did High Stakes Living. It was on cardplayer.com. And when you did a tour of your house, I was, I'd heard you were successful sports bettor, and I knew about your poker, but then when I saw your house, I was freaking blown away. I mean, it's insane. Now, obviously, I'm guessing that was paid for by the sports books. Are you still? Obviously, you're still in it because I just saw your pool in the background before you got on. And are you still looking to sell it? What's the status?
Yeah, we put our house on the market. There was so I took a year off. I got a lot of people stiff me for money, and I was kind of like, okay, if I'm going to get back into gambling, I need more of a secure bankroll. I don't want to be. So what are my options here? I can, liquidate some assets. I can liquidate some investments. I could sell my house. And really the big option for me was selling this house in some ways. But I've learned pretty quickly that it takes a lot for me to actually pull the trigger because we've had people offer, and it's, I'm actually just before talking to you guys, I just went through the same thing with my real estate with someone who was made a real serious offer so I don't know. Me and my girlfriend, we did everything in this house. We picked out every fixture. We designed the entire thing. At first I was like, I don't think I can afford to live in LA in a $4 million house and not work. And there's a lot of pressure to make money. And I like taking 2 years off, et cetera, et cetera. Let's sell the house and live a more frugal lifestyle. Let's travel more. Let's do all this stuff. And then I started looking at other houses that I could live in, and that were renting for even $15,000 a month, which would be more frugal in some ways because owning a house is more expensive, obviously. And I was like, there just isn't anything that gives me the level of happiness as this current place does. So it's still for sale, and maybe I'll sell it, maybe I won't, but it won't be because
You have
I
to
don't
be
know.
driving.
I'm very conflicted. I'm like heartbroken that I'm selling the house in some ways, and because of that, like I've turned down probably lots of sane offers that I should have probably.
Yeah, your
or
real
not
estate
lost,
agent. Your real estate
doesn't
agent
like
has
me.
to be on mega tilt. I mean,
yeah, it doesn't like me. Does not like me too much in some ways. But that being said, there hasn't been. Okay, I don't want to say there's been lots of. There hasn't. There's like an opportunity where we probably priced the house a little bit higher than it should have been in the beginning, but that was because we weren't super excited to sell it. So we're like, if someone paid us this much money, we'll sell it. And then we lowered it a little bit, and since we lowered it, we've had like a lot of activity, and I'm kind of like, well, I don't know that I necessarily am super excited to sell it. But if someone offers the asking price, we'll probably take it and figure out someplace else to live for a little while. It's really tough for me to justify having a depreciating asset in some ways, because the house is a depreciating asset. It'll never be worth more than it is right now, in my opinion. It's worth more now because it's technically new construction, so you get a premium for selling a brand new house that's brand new versus living in it for 2 years. It's not brand new anymore. It's expensive to live in some ways, and more so I can just do a lot more with that money. And so my thought was, okay, let's sell this house, let's capitalize it, looking at it from a business perspective, right? That was the idea. But then once you get to the point where this is where you actually live and sleep, and you picked out this room and you did this in that room with this person, becomes a lot more difficult to say, oh yeah, this is a depreciating asset. No, it's a house, and
Right.
you enjoy living here. Yes, I do. So will I sell it? I don't know. We'll see.
Any celebrities come through there or interested in the
Yeah,
house?
we had a famous celebrity. I don't want to mention her name. She actually came and looked at the house 5 times. It was the most unbelievable thing ever. Like,
Wow.
my guy was so sure that she was the one who wanted to buy the house. She was like bringing her kid in the room and like closing his eyes and showing him this and showing him that. And
Is she hot?
yeah, she was
Chloe?
very beautiful. Yeah, she was famous and hot. And we had like some other people, and so I was never here because the agent shows them on their own. But there was one day where I had to do a bunch of work, and it was like a broker's open house, so it's only supposed to be technically real estate agents who come and look at it on a Tuesday afternoon. But there was agents bringing their clients. So I was like sitting in the room doing like a little bit of work. Otherwise, I was never here ever, obviously. And there was like this model. I didn't know who she was, but I'd seen her before. She was like some Victoria's Secret model, and she was barely spoke any English, and she was like 6 feet tall or whatever. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, this is kind of interesting. So
Now, how do
got
these
some
people?
good publicity? Yeah.
How
go
do
ahead.
these people look at you? Like your neighbors, people that come look at the house. I mean, you're a young-looking guy. I've seen your girl. She's young and hot.
Right.
Like, are they like?
It's funny, yeah.
Are these guys drug dealers or something? I mean, what do they think?
No, it's funny. Like, so they see the media room and they say, "What does this guy do? I mean, what's going on?" And they say, "Well, he's a sports bettor." Then they always ask how old he is, and my agent didn't know how old I was. And like you said, I look fairly young, so I think he's around 30. I'm actually older than that, 35. And so they would all get like, really sad that someone 30 years old. But to be honest, it doesn't take much to own a house like this. It's not like the house is fully paid off. I have a mortgage. It's not like,
Right.
the house is not like all bought in cash or whatever it was. So, I mean, I feel like I'm doing well, but there's many, especially in this town, like I'm like down here and everyone else is like up here in this town. There's always going to be someone who's richer than you, better looking than you, smarter than you, and has more money than you and whatever. So I don't really think about that too much.
Right. Well, listen, I tell you what, you're a great dude. Really, we've taken a lot of your time. Appreciate
Yeah,
Sorry about that.
appreciate it a
No,
lot.
it's cool. It's interesting.
What can we look forward to you as far as the poker world goes? Where are we going to see you next?
I want to play a lot of these EPT events. I'm kind of lost the interest in playing like the WPT tournaments just because it's like the same locations all the time. So I think schedule permitting, I'd like to play like a few more EPT events, assuming I have the time. And it would be perfect if like the EPT season coincide with like the off season, but it doesn't. So I'll probably play like the Monaco EPT tournament. I played that last time. I'll play that again. I want to play a couple of the other tournaments in nice locations. San Remo, I'd like to play that one. I guess the Monaco tournament might not even be in Monaco anymore, right? It might be someplace else now. Is that what they're saying?
I'm not sure.
So wherever they put it, I'd like to play it. And then I'll play like a little bit more. I'm hoping to get on one of these, like on the big game show or something like that. I'm hoping to get on one, or maybe the Full Tilt Poker After Dark cash game. I'd like to play on some of those. But other than that, I guess just the odd 5 or 6 tournaments a year is probably it. So.
Wow. Hey, I'd
Nice.
be remiss real quick if I didn't ask you. Kobe said recently that he would beat LeBron in his sleep one-on-one. I know that you have said that Kobe is overrated. What is your take on that?
I don't know. I mean, feel like LeBron could beat him because he's more gifted, but the fact that Kobe said that increases the fact that his ability to win, because he's just such a sick individual. Like, he is such a competitor. He has that competitive thing over LeBron, like, by a long shot.
Right.
I mean, so it would be tough. It depends on how closely they called the game. Because if it was very physical, I think LeBron would have a huge edge because he's a lot bigger. But Kobe's a better shooter and a better competitor. It would be fun. To me, it's like a slam dunk. Why don't they have this in the All-Star game instead of the fucking dunk contest? Have a one-on-one tournament. It's a joke. I mean, this would be the number one watched event, I think. Can you imagine like a 16-team single elimination tournament?
No brainer.
One-on-one tournament.
No brainer.
It would be exciting.
Awesome.
Yeah, great idea.
Yeah.
Great idea.
So I would say Kobe, but I don't know. We'll see. Maybe LeBron. I don't know. I don't like to.
Right.
I find when I go on the record, I'm usually wrong. So it's better to be evasive.
So if you want to check out Haralabos' blog, aloneinthecorner.com, and I noticed you're tweeting.
Every 4 months.
Right.
One post every 4 months. That's the ratio.
And I noticed you're tweeting, and your Twitter, it's twitter.com/Haralabos, correct?
Yeah, I'll actually be actively probably blogging a little bit more during basketball season, a lot more, and I'll probably be tweeting a lot more during basketball season, so they're more than welcome to follow me.
Nice.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
No, cool, man.
Thank you.
Plugs.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, dudes, take care. All right, bye-bye.
All right, thanks for checking out the Poker Static Hot Seat. We'll see you next week.